Buenos días a todos y
Good
a todas.
morning,
Bienvenidos a
everyone.
esta
Welcome
importante
to this important
conversación de hoy sobre el
conversation
futuro de
about
la
the future
oposición
of the
democrática
opposition, the
en Venezuela y
democratic
sobre la
opposition in
coyuntura
Venezuela,
actual
and the
en ese
current
país.
situation in that
Agradecemos su
country.
participación en este
We thank you
espacio
for
organizado
participating
por
in
el
this
Atlantic
event
Council.
organized by the
Para los que no
Atlantic
me
Council.
conocen, yo
For those
soy
of you who
Jeff
don't know me,
Ramsey.
I'm Jeff
Soy Senior
Ramsey,
Fellow,
Senior
asistente
Fellow
principal aquí
here
en el Centro de Adrian
at the
Arch para
Adrian
América
Arch Latin
Latina
America
del
Center
Atlantic Council,
of the
donde
Atlantic
dirijo
Council,
nuestro programa
where
de
I
Venezuela.
lead our
Nosotros
Venezuela
en el
group.
Atlantic Council
At the
seguimos muy
Atlantic
de cerca la
Council, we
crisis
very
en
closely
Venezuela, principalmente a
are
través del
following the
trabajo
crisis in
de
Venezuela,
nuestro
mainly
Venezuela
through the
Solutions
work of
Group.
our Venezuela
El
Solutions
Solutions
Group,
Group es un
which
grupo de
is
trabajo
a
diverso de
diverse working
expertos y
group
actores clave
consisting
de
of
Venezuela,
experts
Estados
and
Unidos,
key
América
stakeholders in
Latina y
Venezuela,
Europa,
the United
que hemos
States, Latin
convocado
America,
en
and Europe,
momentos claves
which we brought
desde
together at a
2023
critical
para
juncture in
impulsar un debate sobre
2023 to
cómo lograr
encourage
una
discussion of
solución
how to
pacífica,
achieve a
democrática y
peaceful,
negociada a la crisis
democratic,
en el país.
negotiated solution
Una pregunta
to
clave
the
que
crisis in
nosotros en el Atlantic
Venezuela.
Council y
A key
nosotros en el
question
grupo
that we
para
at the Atlantic
el grupo
Council and
especial
in
para
the
Venezuela
Venezuela
estamos
Solutions
enfrentando
Group are
es qué
looking
sigue,
at
qué
as
sigue en este
what is
momento.
next.
Maduro robó las elecciones
Maduro
presidenciales del
stole the
28 de
presidential
julio
elections
del año
held
pasado,
in
ha
July of
desatado una brutal
2024,
represión contra
unleashing
líderes
brutal
opositores
repression
y en este
against
momento es
opposition
difícil
leaders. And at this
identificar
time, it's
oportunidades
difficult to
claras
see clear
para la democracia.
opportunities
Sin
for
embargo, eso no
democracy.
significa que no haya
Nevertheless, that does
movimiento,
not mean that
que
there's
no haya
not
actores democráticos
any
en el país
movement,
que
that there
siguen
aren't democratic actors
haciendo
in the
un
country
trabajo
that
importante
are
para
doing important
avanzar en una
work
apertura democrática en el
to
país.
move toward
Ahora, el gobierno
a
venezolano ha
democratic
convocado
future.
elecciones regionales y
Right now,
legislativas
regional
para el 25
legislative
de mayo,
elections have
pero sin
been called
publicar un
for May
cronograma electoral
25th,
y
but
sin
there
aclarar las
is no
condiciones en las
electoral
que se van a
timeline yet, nor
desarrollar
have the
esas
conditions
elecciones.
surrounding those
Mientras algunos
elections
sectores
been
de la
clarified.
oposición
While
consideran fuerza
some segments
participar,
of the
otros
opposition are
siguen debatiendo
considering
cuál debe
taking
ser
part,
la
others
estrategia
continue
a
to
seguir.
debate what the
Otro
best
tema clave
strategy would
es
be.
una posible reforma
Another key issue
constitucional
is
que
a
Maduro ha
possible
puesto sobre la
constitutional
mesa.
reform that
Esto
Maduro has
podría
put on the
presentar una
table.
oportunidad para movilizar
Might
a
this
la
be an
población
opportunity
y
to
enfrentar
mobilize the
al autoritarismo
population
en
and
Venezuela.
confront
¿Hay alguna
authoritarianism in
razón para creer que
Venezuela?
se puede retomar la
Is there any
búsqueda de
reason to
acuerdos
believe that
políticos
one
con
might
Maduro, como la
be
plataforma
able to
unitaria
resume seeking political
intentó en las
agreements with Maduro
negociaciones que
as
condujeron a la
plataf- as
elección del
the
28 de
Unitary
julio del
Platform
año pasado?
attempted with
En este
negotiations
contexto,
that led
es
up to
fundamental
the
escuchar a quienes están en
July
el
28th
terreno
election?
enfrentando
It's
estos
very important to
desafíos y
listen
tomando
to
decisiones
people who
claves
are
sobre el
out there
futuro
in the
de la
field
oposición.
facing these
Hoy
challenges and
tenemos el
making key
honor y el
decisions
gran
about
lujo
the
de contar
opposition's
con un
future.
invitado
And
que no solo
today
ha
we
sido
have
testigo de estos
the honor and the
procesos, sino
privilege
que también
of
ha
having
jugado
someone
un
here who's
papel
not just a
activo en
witness to these
ellos.
processes,
Es
but
un
has
placer
been
para
an active
nosotros poder
player
dar la
in them.
bienvenida a
It's a
Roberto
pleasure to
Enríquez,
welcome
secretario
Roberto
ejecutivo
Enríquez, the
de la
Executive
Plataforma Unitaria
Secretary of
Democrática
the
de
Democratic
Venezuela.
Unitary
El
Platform
señor
of
Enríquez
Venezuela.
es un
Mr.
reconocido
Enríquez
líder
is
político
a
venezolano
well-known
con
Venezuelan
una
political
trayectoria de
leader
lucha por la
with a long
democracia
history of
y
fighting
la
for democracy and institutions in
institucionalidad de
his
su país.
country.
Es un abogado,
He's an
político y
attorney,
exdiputado
politician, and
venezolano,
former
presidente
Venezuelan
del Partido Social
deputy,
Cristiano
uh,
COPEI
leader
y ha
of
sido
the
miembro de la
Social
mesa de
Christian Party,
negociación para
COPEI, and
encontrar una
was part
salida
of the
democrática a la crisis
negotiation group
venezolana.
that sought to find a
En los
democratic
últimos
solution
años
to
formó
the
parte del
Venezuelan
grupo
crisis.
negociador
In
de la
previous years, he
plataforma
was part
en
of
las
the
conversaciones con el
Unitary
gobierno de Maduro.
Platform's
Su
negotiating
experiencia
group
y su
in
perspectiva son
conversations with
fundamentales para entender
Maduro.
los
His
desafíos
experience and
y las
perspective are vital to
oportunidades que
understanding the
enfrenta la
challenges
oposición
and
en este momento
opportunities
crucial.
that the
Roberto,
opposition faces at
bienvenido
this
y muchas
critical
gracias por
time.
acompañarnos hoy.
Roberto, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today. It's an honor to be with you and the whole team and the whole audience following this. It's really an honor, and I'm so thankful that
Por
people are paying
supuesto.
attention to my country.
Roberto, quisiera
Of
empezar
course.
con una pregunta
Roberto, I'd like
general.
to begin with a
Me
general question.
gustaría entender tu visión de la
I'd like to
situación
understand your
en
view
Venezuela
of
hoy
the
en día,
situation
a
right
8
now in
meses del fraude
Venezuela,
electoral
8
del 28
months
de julio.
after the electoral
¿Cómo
fraud
describiría
of
el
July
estado actual de
28th.
la oposición
How would you
venezolana y
describe the
cuáles
current state
oportunidades
of
que
play in
existen
the Venezuelan
en el
opposition, and what
horizonte que usted
opportunities
está
do you
viendo?
see on the horizon?
Puedo comenzar ya con
Thank
una
you.
frase, ¿no?
Well, I'd
Y la voy a
begin
desarrollar. Hoy
with
te puedo garantizar que estamos
a
más unidos que
single
nunca.
sentence. I can guarantee that we are more
Estamos más
united than
unidos que
ever
nunca
today,
porque nos une
more united
un
than ever
mandato
before,
popular
because we have a
del cual
popular
puedo desarrollar luego
mandate, and I'll
algunos detalles, pero
delve
que
into that in
emana de
detail
unas elecciones primarias
soon, but
organizadas por la
came out
plataforma
of
unitaria,
primary elections
fue el
organized
resultado
by
del
the
28 de
platform
julio.
because of
Estamos más
the
unidos que
result of
nunca
July
porque
28th. We're
hay
more
dos
united than
cosas que unen
ever
mucho, ¿no? El
because
amor y
there
el
are two
dolor.
things that drive
Y
this,
la
love and
persecución y la
pain.
represión que hemos
The
sufrido, que ha
persecution
sufrido
and
la causa
repression
democrática
that we have suffered
después del
in
28 de
fighting
julio
for
no
the
tiene
democratic
precedentes.
cause after
Y
July 28th has
eso,
been unprecedented,
lejos de debilitar, ha
and
fortalecido
that has
el
far from
afecto,
weakened us.
la
It has
solidaridad,
strengthened
el amor
people's
y el
feelings
compromiso
of
entre nosotros.
solidarity and
Entonces,
love and commitment.
te puedo decir que hoy te encuentras con
So I assure
una
you
causa democrática y unas
that the
fuerzas
Democratic
opositoras que sí han
cause
sido
and the
víctimas
opposition
ciertamente
forces, yes,
de
they
una
have been the
represión
victim
desproporcionada.
of
Tiene
terrible
el
repression.
cuadro político nacional, regional, municipal e
The
incluso comunitario
municipal,
en situaciones
regional,
muy, muy
community
complejas,
teams have encountered
exilados,
themselves
presos,
in terrible
clandestinos,
situations. They've had
todos
to go
atravesando,
underground. They've been
son
exiled.
muy contadas excepciones las que
There are
todavía
very
tienen
few
alguna
exceptions of
capacidad de
people
movilidad,
who are still really
pero
able
eso
to
ha
freely
servido para
move about.
fortalecer el
But what that has
compromiso
done is
unitario
that
entre
it has
nosotros. Entonces te puedo
strengthened
decir que la
the
primera etapa
resolve
es
and
que la
commitment
causa
amongst the
democrática con su
opposition.
liderazgo
So the
se encuentra
Democratic cause
muy unida, muy
and all
firme,
its
muy
leaders are very
resiliente,
committed, very
y hoy
resilient.
nos estás encontrando, sí, en el,
And now
con mucha nitidez, con mucha claridad, muy comprometidos con el
everyone is
mandato que nos dieron
very
los venezolanos,
clear
pero
about the
también muy
mandate we've been
comprometidos.
given by
Ese
Venezuelans
afecto y
and
esa unidad
very
está muy acendrada
committed.
porque el dolor
We
sí,
feel
la
that
persecución
love
sí,
because the
la
pain is there,
respuesta nuestra ha
yes.
sido estar muy,
But our
muy
response
unidos.
to that is to further
Gracias.
unify.
Justo sobre esa unidad,
Thank you. So
hemos
with
visto
regard to that unity,
que la plataforma unitaria ha
we've seen the
enfrentado
Unitary
divisiones
Platform
internas o ha tenido
grapple with
conversaciones
internal divisions in the
internas muy
past.
intensas en los
There have been
últimos
very
meses.
intense internal discussions in recent
¿Cómo ves
months.
el estado de la unidad opositora en este momento, en este
So
contexto de
how do you
represión
see that in this
y
context
la
of
dinámica actual
repression and the
en
current
Venezuela?
dynamics in
Y mira,
Venezuela?
la fortaleza de la plataforma
Look,
unitaria,
the
y es bueno
strength
dejarlo claro,
of the
no es
Unitary
la suma de
Platform
un partido más
is
otro,
not
más
that
otro,
it's
más
just the sum of its
otro.
parts,
El
this party,
verdadero
that party.
poder de la plataforma
The true
unitaria es lo que
power
simboliza,
of the
es
platform
lo que
lies in what it
encarna en el imaginario
symbolizes,
popular.
what
Y
it
eso nos da una
embodies
gran
in the
responsabilidad a
popular
nosotros.
imagination.
La
And that's
plataforma
what gives us
unitaria ha
stability.
sido,
The
te
Unitary
pido que hagas una
Platform,
retrospectiva desde que existe el chavismo en Venezuela,
looking
la
back
coalición
since
más exitosa
Chavez
en
time, has
términos
been the most
políticos y electorales
successful
que ha tenido Venezuela
coalition in
desde que
political
existe el
and
chavismo. Logramos
electoral terms.
reunificar la
We
fuerza
have
democrática,
reunified
logramos
democratic forces,
consultándole a la gente,
succeeded
no
in
popularmente, consultándole a la gente,
consulting
definir
the
un
people
liderazgo, todos
themselves
nos
as to what
sumamos
leaders they want. We all
a ese liderazgo que
backed
encarnó y que encarna
that
la decisión de
leadership,
un país ese 22 de
which
octubre en manos de María
embodied
Corina
the
Machado,
decision
después que
of the
todos
people
con
in the form
absoluto
of Maria
desprendimiento,
Corina
acatando ese
Machado.
mandato, trabajamos hacia el
We've
28 de julio que
stuck
llevó a
with
la
the
victoria de
mandate,
Edmundo González.
worked
Entonces lo
towards
que te trato de
July
decir con esto
28th, which resulted
es
in the
que ahí es
victory
donde
of
está la
Edmundo
fuerza de la
Gonzalez.
plataforma.
So that's where
Obviamente,
the platform's
como
strength
órgano
lies.
plural, como órgano que tiene una
As a
dirección política en
plural
donde
body, of
existen
course, with
diversos
a board
partidos
of directors
políticos
with
dentro de un
representation
abanico
from
muy
different
amplio del espectro democrático,
political parties
es
that
normal
represent a
que
wide
su
gamut
naturaleza, y más
of
bien esa es una
positions,
de sus
then
fortalezas
of
también,
course
es
it's
procesar
part of
diferencias,
its nature, but it's also its
similitudes, es
strength
procesar
that it
contradicciones,
processes differences, it
no
processes
afinidades, es
contradictions.
procesar
It's
incluso,
not
fíjate,
about
antagonismo,
everyone agreeing.
no
There is even
concordancia.
antagonism,
Es allí
of
donde está el gran
course,
valor de
but
la
that's
plataforma unitaria.
where
Tenemos
the
unas reglas de
value
juego que
lies.
incluso
We have
nosotros mismos tenemos un mecanismo
rules that we've
institucional para tomar
established. We have
decisiones.
an
Y es por
institutional
eso que
mechanism for
a
decision
mí,
making.
yo creo que hoy en
And
día
that is why
nos hemos presentado al
I
país
believe
con una hoja de ruta muy
that
clara, de la
we've
cual
been
vamos a
able
hablar
to
ahora
present a
en los tiempos
single
que podamos,
roadmap
con un plan de trabajo
to the
muy
people.
claro
We
también
have a very
hacia las
clear
regiones
work
y
plan
a veces
for the regions
las
as
cosas
well.
muy, muy pequeñas y no
Sometimes
trato
it's the little
de
things,
ser despectivo de ninguna
and I
manera,
don't
pero
mean
a
to
veces
diminish anything.
individualidades o
But
factores que no
sometimes,
son
yes, they're
expresión
individual opinions, but they don't represent the will of the majority. I'm not talking just about the platform, but about the population as a whole. And sometimes those individual opinions make disproportionate noise or they get disproportionate media coverage, but they're not what matters. As an institution, we have a very serious work plan that's thoroughly discussed, and it is the outcome of the fact that we know how to process our differences and let them
Bien,
coalesce
pues
into one
tengo varias preguntas en
approach.
seguimiento a eso,
I have a number of
justo
follow-up
sobre la
questions to
coyuntura
that,
actual y con respecto
um,
a
zooming in on the current
este proceso electoral que ha
situation and the
resultado en
electoral
horno para
process
25
that
de mayo,
Maduro has
aunque existen
called
grandes
for
dudas
May
sobre la
25th, even
viabilidad
though there are a
de
lot
ese
of
proceso.
doubts surrounding the
Pero antes de
viability
entrar
of
en
that
eso,
process.
quería
But before
preguntarle,
we get into that, I wanted to
Roberto,
ask you,
nosotros en Washington,
Roberto, those of
los
us
que seguimos la
in
situación en
Washington who
Venezuela,
have been
creo
following
que muchos
Venezuela
conocemos
closely,
a la líder opositora María Corina
we
Machado,
are all familiar
todos
with
conocemos
opposition leader
al
Maria Corina
candidato
Machado,
Edmundo
familiar with the
González.
candidate Edmundo
Sin embargo,
González,
creo que todavía existe
but I think
eh, eh,
there's still
como algunos desafíos en educar al
some
público aquí en
challenges
Washington
in educating people here
sobre
in
la estructura de
Washington
la plataforma
about the
unitaria, cómo
structure of
funciona
the
la
Unitary
coalición.
Platform,
¿Nos
how
puede
this
dar como una
coalition
orientación
works. Could you give
para
us
un público
an
internacional
overview for an
sobre esas
international audience?
dinámicas, la toma de decisiones
What are the
y un poco
dynamics?
la
How does
estructura
the
general
decision
de la
making
plataforma
work? What is
unitaria?
the overall structure of the platform? The Unitary Platform is a political coalition that is very diverse. What unites us is a commitment to political change. We work on two main lines. First of all, to reunify the opposition, which we succeeded in with the primary elections. That took a lot of work. And there the purpose was to unite democratic forces to beat the adversary in presidential elections. In parallel, we understood that Venezuela needed an agreement, and we initiated a negotiation process that led to two documents that are still in force. And those were signed by the leader who left in 2023. It's an agreement, a memorandum of understanding of Mexico, it was called, that laid out a whole negotiation process with dialogue to resolve issues, a very broad plan for addressing democratic challenges and achieving social cohesion. And then we have the Barbados Agreement. So this plural political guideline, and I'll give you an example that can just show you how serious the platform has been in its actions. We have political actors within the platform that have enormous differences ideologically, programmatically, but when we're in the platform, we believe behind those personal ideologies. We set aside our bias because what is most important is the good of the country. So it's a very mature and deliberative body. And when we arrive at a conclusion, it means that many of us, all of us really, set aside our own beliefs to achieve something in common. So it's a very reliable position. The Venezuelan people can count on it, and the international community can count on it. And our adversary can count on it, knows that when we commit to something, we deliver on that. And so the mechanics are that we understand the responsibility we hold to be that collegiate body that carries with it this mandate from the Venezuelan people who will forgive mistakes or differences, but there's something they'll never forgive, and that would be a lack of unity. So the platform embodies that challenge of devising that architecture of bringing together the democratic cause. So we are the political leadership incarnate. We have that plurality, and we carry the mandate of leadership embodied also in Maria Corina. And the platform is in constant communication with our country's most important leader, with her, with the world, but with other segments of Venezuelan society that are not necessarily part of the platform per se. So that's the enormous challenge. And we're not trying to be popular or loved. We're trying to have this inclusive, organic structure to carry forward the people's mandate to be united and to
Gracias,
seek
Roberto. ¿Y nos
democracy.
puedes describir un poco,
Thank you,
acabas de
Roberto.
decir que
Can
el liderazgo lo
you
encarna María Corina
say you
Machado?
were talking about the leadership
Y
of
creo
Maria
que
Corina Machado?
eso queda bastante claro
It's
en el discurso del
patently
movimiento opositor en
clear in
Venezuela,
some of
también
the
en las
discourse of the
declaraciones de
opposition
apoyo de
movement
la
in
comunidad
Venezuela
internacional,
and
pero
support
¿nos puedes
from
describir un
the
poco
international
esa
community. But could you
relación
describe
entre
for
María
us
Corina
the
Machado y
relationship
la plataforma
between
unitaria
Maria
y el
Corina
venezolano
Machado and
Edmundo
the
González?
Unitary Platform,
¿Cómo
as well
cabe
as
lo
Edmundo
planteado por
González?
Edmundo González con
And
la plataforma
what
unitaria y
relationship
la
do
coalición
they both
amplia que
have with the
representa?
Unitary Platform and this broad coalition it represents? Let me try to paint a picture here. So this is an autonomous political movement. What that does not mean, however, is that it is isolated. What autonomous means in this case is that we debate, we listen, we analyze, but we set our positions autonomously. The unitary platform is the one that sets the path forward and does two things. It unites democratic forces by popular mandate, but, and let me give you an example. I have been working for 13 years in this, and so I understand that I've had more defeats than victories throughout my political career. And in the primaries were no exception to that. So the unitary platform decided to choose whoever won. That was the mandate we got from the people. So the relationship with Maria Corina is as follows. It must be, and it should be one of the broadest communication, cooperation, and political coordination possible. Why do I say that? Because Maria Corina, vis-a-vis her mandate, does not have to ask permission from the platform to state her positions. We, however, as those of us running the platform as an autonomous entity that has a mandate entrusted in it by the Venezuelan people, and Maria Corina, as one of the main leaders, also has her commitment to the people. So we both sides have to honor that mandate, communicate, and we may have different positions, but we discuss them, we debate them with the greatest respect. We have shown consideration and something that brings us together that's very powerful is the mandate entrusted in us by the Venezuelan people. We are the collegial body that has set the path forward, and Maria Corina, who is implementing that mandate. The platform, we are very conscious of our mandate, but communication is fluid, it is affectionate, harmonious, sincere, and of course, the idea is to ensure that we are providing an effective response. We are united. Thank you so much. Turning to the current circumstances, Maduro has supposedly called for regional and legislative elections for May 25th. Nonetheless, we haven't seen any electoral calendar for those elections. there is a lot unknown as far as what the details of the elections would be. What is the position of the Unitary Platform with respect to the elections that have been called?
O sea, ¿cómo ves la ruta de aquí para el 25 de mayo?
What do you see as the path forward between now and May 25th for the democratic forces in the country? Let me confess, I do support the platform's position, but what's important is how the platform sees this. The platform has taken a position that takes into account the feelings of the country and our nature. Our platform is deeply democratic, and of course, we champion the right to vote. This is our respect for the country. The country presently has suffered a major shock. That was what happened on July 28th. We continue to invite the entire country to continue to fight for our civic rights. Given that challenge and these parliamentary, regional, and legislative elections that have been called, we haven't taken a single position. At the end of the day, it don't work. So to just say yes or no, we'll participate or we'll refrain just because without giving a political basis for that is, in our opinion, an error. So the platform has been very clear. The right to vote, the right to cast a vote has been abused and destroyed in Venezuela. What is the strategic path forward then? And so we want to repave the electoral path in the country, rebuild that road. We have a very specific roadmap for this. Let me give you an example. I don't know if you like soccer. Well, some of us like soccer, yes. When you get to the field with your team and the field has holes and puddles and what you can't get onto the field, and the players and the referees don't let you onto the field. This is what's happening right now. Our candidates, the vast majority, have been incarcerated, they're living in exile, or they are in hiding. And so if you look at the communities and the regions of the country where people are living in fear, they are traumatized. Given all of the logistical difficulties, they're not even in their homes, they've had to leave. So how are we going to be able to ensure the right to vote? Perhaps the most powerful symbol of the Unitary Platform and electoral records. So we're there, but they have the referee in their pocket. There have to be conditions. We have to ask for conditions and not excuses. That is not giving excuses to say that these are the conditions that need to be in place. That is the respect for the Venezuelan people to ensure that they are able to vote. So going back to this matter of soccer, I think it's a way of saying that today in Venezuela, what is being proposed does not even meet the basic elements of a free election. There's asymmetry and adversity. So we don't even see a way for the platform to participate as things stand right now. And so based on what you're saying, and as far as I understand, the platform is leaving the door open to participate in the elections, but does see the need to demand some very clear conditions. I think this opens up the possibility for maybe some type of political agreement that would lead to those conditions. Is that what you are seeing? Is that what the platform is proposing? We want to repave this electoral road. It can't just simply be the platform doing backdoor negotiations. Here, I have the roadmap the platform has devised. And again, if we are going to repave this electoral road with conditions, we have to go back to some of the underlying problems, which is the results of the July 28th elections. What are we as a platform proposing? We either have to take that seriously or consider it to be the decisive step.
Mira dónde voy. El problema grueso del país, la plataforma tiene una agenda de lucha para eso.
Major problem, we as the platform have a roadmap for how we are going to fight it. Understanding that we're not trying to be sexy, we're not trying to be popular, we're trying to be responsible. So for us, the first step would be to begin, and we're not placing conditions or ultimatums, but we are going to insist, we are formally requesting, and I want the international community to know this, and the adversaries and the Venezuelan people, and this is like our insignia right now, we are requesting a formal and transparent process of negotiations, the basis of which will be the truth about the July 28th elections. What does that mean? We know where the truth lies, but we also understand that a negotiation process needs to have a wide reach. There has been no possibility of engaging in a negotiations process to talk about a post-electoral Venezuela. That document, that memorandum of understanding is so important. When we talk about negotiations, we understand that formal and transparent means this is the way the country needs to view it. There have to be international guarantees, and it means logically that it has to be the weight of those who are representing the feeling of the country, the leadership in our case and in the case of the Chavismo side. We're not looking at this issue in Venezuela in a narrow way. We're looking at it more broadly. And please understand, this is where the feelings are. Imagine what it took for so many different political parties to put the country first and come to an agreement on something, and something that we know is not popular, but we know is responsible. We are starting this, the conditions are not in place yet, but this is a political work to begin comprehensive negotiation process that respects the will of the majority, takes into account the minority, nobody feels excluded, and serves the Venezuelan people. Venezuelans know that. To solve the problem of garbage, neighbors can't go off on different tangents. They have to come together to solve it. We're seeing what's happening in Ukraine right now. and how many deaths, and that will ultimately end up with negotiations. Thank God Venezuela is still far from that, and the Democratic platform is very seriously proposing comprehensive negotiations that respect the will of the Venezuelan people, but also include factors that do represent the people's will, that enjoy the trust of the Venezuelan people, and of course, on the opposite side, represent their interlocutors, but the Venezuelan people
Gracias,
must
Roberto.
decide.
Y antes de continuar con la conversación, me gustaría
Thank you,
recordarle
Roberto. And
a los
before
que nos están
continuing, I'd
viendo
like to
que
remind
el
those who
título
are
de este
following us
evento
that
es
the
Una
title of this
conversación
event
con Roberto
was
Enríquez. Y
A
dado eso,
Conversation with Roberto
no
Enriquez,
quiero
and therefore,
monopolizar la
I don't want to
conversación. Si
monopolize
tiene preguntas
conversation. If you have
para Roberto
questions
Enríquez,
for Roberto
ustedes pueden
Enriquez, you are
hacer a
welcome
través de nuestra
to
aplicación
get
que se
those to
llama
us through our app,
askac.org. En español
askac.org.
sería askac.org.
That's
Pueden
askac.org.
seleccionar el
And there
evento
you
de
can
hoy ahí
select
en el menú
this
y ahí
event
pueden
from the
plantear sus
menu,
preguntas
and that's where you
para
can
Roberto.
drop your questions for
Una
Roberto.
pregunta de seguimiento de
So a
parte
follow-up
mía es,
question.
todavía hay mucha incertidumbre sobre
There's
el
still so
camino
much
en
uncertainty
adelante. Sé
surrounding
que la
the path
coalición es
forward.
diversa
The
y estas
coalition,
son
we know, is
conversaciones vivas,
diverse,
¿no?
and these
Sin embargo,
are
parece que hay algunos
conversations that are
partidos
happening
que han
right
conformado
now. But there are
históricamente
some parties
la
that
plataforma
have
unitaria que han decidido
historically been part of the
plantear
platform
públicamente su
that have
interés en participar en
publicly
esta elección
spoken
ahora,
about
por
wishing to
ahora,
take
pautada
part
para el 25 de
in these
mayo, ¿no?
elections supposedly taking place on May
¿Cómo ven
25th.
dentro de la plataforma unitaria
So within
su
the
relación con esos
platform,
partidos?
what is the
¿Esa relación
relationship with those
sigue viva,
parties? Is it
viva? ¿Siguen
still
comunicándose con esos
a,
partidos? ¿Forman parte de la
a
coalición
valid
todavía?
part of, are
Mira,
they
la
still a part of the
plataforma
platform?
unitaria presentó una hoja de ruta
The
que
Unitary Platform
aprobó con
presented
mayoría
its
calificada
roadmap
después de
that
un debate
was
profundo.
accepted
Logramos
by
un
a
acuerdo.
majority
Ahora,
after a profound
yo
debate.
creo que hay momentos en
We
donde
reached that
cada
agreement.
quien también le toca
But
rendirle
there are
cuentas al
times
país
when
de sus posiciones.
people need
Yo no te
to
puedo plantear un tema que no
let the
ha
people know
sido
what their
trabajado
positions are. So it's
en
not
el
that
seno de la plataforma,
this wasn't
porque como
discussed
instancia
within the
plural que somos,
platform. We
son
have a
temas que nosotros
plurality of parties,
estamos eh,
and
por procesar.
accordingly,
Formalmente no lo
we
no lo
have to
hemos
process
procesado porque
these things.
sí te voy a decir dos cosas.
I'm going to say
Primero,
two things to this.
obviamente con absoluto respeto,
First of all,
nosotros nos
with
dimos unas reglas de
all
juego
due respect,
y
we set out
en muchas ocasiones los
game rules.
partidos a
And
quienes
in
trato
many
con toda la
cases, the
consideración, pero sí tengo
parties,
que decir,
which I'll
muchas
treat
veces los
equally and
partidos
with great
que
consideration,
hoy
but I have to say, sometimes
no
parties
acompañan la posición, la hoja de ruta de la
or parties
plataforma,
that don't stick
muchas veces
to
han
the
logrado
platform's
decisiones en donde
roadmap
nosotros
have
no hemos estado de acuerdo
made
y las
decisions
hemos
that we
acompañado.
don't agree
Las
with, and
Aristide Galvani,
still we've supported
un
them.
gran líder de la
Galvani, for
democracia
instance,
cristiana
a great
americana, decía,
American
en
Christian
democracia
Democrat
y
leader,
los
said,
órganos
in
democráticos, las
democracy,
decisiones se
in
toman por
democratic
mayoría y se acatan
bodies,
por unanimidad. Lo cierto
decisions are made by the
es que yo creo que
majority and
esas
are
son
followed by
explicaciones que tienen que
unanimity.
dar los factores
So
políticos.
those
Nosotros no
political
somos un
players
tribunal,
have to give their
somos una
explanations.
instancia
We're not a
democrática,
court,
pero
we're a
yo no
democratic
puedo,
body.
no tengo autoridad para
And I do not
darte
have the
resultados sobre un
authority
tema que la plataforma,
to
porque
tell
sería desconsiderado
you
con todo
anything
el cuerpo
definitive
colegiado.
about something
Lo
that
que sí no
is
podemos que así como
being
unos
deliberated.
factores toman la decisión que
So
tú
if
bien
some
conoces,
players
otros
make
factores
the
políticos
decision
tampoco
that you
le
refer to,
podemos negar su derecho
right, we
a
can't
fijar
deny
posición
them
sobre
their
esos temas.
right
Ahora, la
to
plataforma
express a
como
position about
dirección
something,
política
but the
no tiene una
platform,
conclusión
in terms of
sobre
its leadership, does
cómo
not
abordar el
have a
tema,
formal
porque para
conclusion
nosotros el tema de
about
la
how to
unidad
address that.
es
Because
muy
for us, the
sensible,
issue
es
of
muy
unity is very
importante
sensitive.
y cada paso que
It's
damos,
very
cada
important, and
crisis que hay que
every
abordar,
step we take,
la
every
manejamos
crisis we address,
con muchísimo análisis, con
we
muchísima serenidad,
approach with
pero sí
a
te puedo
great deal of
decir que
analysis and
seriousness,
seriousness, but that circumstance does not at all mean fracture, fragmentation, divisions, because our decisions are made by a majority. You're referring to two parties who expressed a position that was different. I respect that, but I can tell you that the platform itself is totally united and aligns perfectly with the sentiment of the
Gracias.
overwhelming
Roberto,
majority of Venezuelans.
varias preguntas
Thank
aquí,
you, Roberto.
que
We've
nos
received a
han
number of
llegado
questions here
justo sobre el tema de negociación. Tú
on the
formaste
topic
parte
of
del
negotiations.
proceso
You
de
were
negociación que
part
al
of
final del día
the negotiation
logró
process
un
that
acuerdo
ultimately did
para llevar a cabo las
succeed in an
elecciones del
agreement
año
for
pasado,
holding last year's
elecciones
elections.
bajo condiciones en la cual
Elections
ganó
with conditions in
Edmundo
which
González.
Edmundo González won.
Sabemos que esa negociación no fue
We
fácil,
know that that negotiation was not easy.
hubo un proceso muy largo para
It
llegar
was a
a esa
lengthy
elección.
process
Pero aquí hay
to
varias
get to that
preguntas.
election. But there are a number
Primero
of
hay una
questions here.
pregunta
First,
aquí
we have a
sobre
question
el tema de leverage, lo que decimos en inglés
about
leverage. Es decir,
leverage.
¿qué influencia puede tener la plataforma
What
unitaria para
leverage could
que
the Unitary
Maduro se siente
Platform
otra vez
have to get
en
Maduro
la
to
mesa de
sit down
negociación?
once again
Y
at a
la segunda pregunta
negotiating
aquí
table?
viene de un
And a
Carlos
second
R.
question from
que
Carlos
te
R.
pregunta cómo
asks
ves la
you
participación de todos los factores de la oposición en una
what
eventual
the
negociación. Por
participation looks
ejemplo,
like of all the
aquí pregunta
different
sobre el rol
opposition
de
groups
María
in a
Corina en
potential
una negociación.
negotiation. What's the
Obviamente
role of
estamos
Maria Corina in
en un momento
negotiations? Were they to take place?
muy
Clearly,
turbulente,
we're
es
in
difícil
turbulent
predecir algunas
times,
cosas, pero sí me
and it may be
gustaría
hard
escuchar
to
un poco de
say certain things, but I'd
tu
like to hear
impresión
from you a
de
bit
estos
about
temas.
your
¿Cómo ves una negociación
impressions.
eventual? ¿Cómo serían
How
los
do you see
incentivos de Maduro
potential
para sentarse? ¿Y cómo ves la
negotiations? What incentives
participación
might
de
Maduro
todos los
have
factores
to
distintos
sit
de
down
la
and
oposición en
negotiate,
unas
and what
negociaciones?
would the participation be of the different opposition groups?
Vamos a hacerle reconocimiento a mis compañeros de la plataforma, no a mí.
I want to acknowledge my
Hay que ver la
colleagues
valentía
at the
que hay que
platform.
tener en esta coyuntura, en
It
este momento
requires a
país,
great deal
para que
of
una decisión
courage
política le
in the
diga a
situation
Venezuela
our country is
que
in
el camino
to say
medular es resolver
the core
la
path
gravedad de lo que está pasando en el
is
país
to
con un
address
proceso de
the
negociación.
grave situations
Obviamente,
we see in the country
nosotros
through a
nos
negotiation
corresponde ser
process.
leales al pueblo venezolano.
We have to be
Y
loyal
eso,
to the Venezuelan
cada
people.
cosa que yo diga, porque estoy hablando por una
Everything
dirección
I
política
say,
que
I'm
además
speaking on
tiene
behalf
que
of political
arrancar
leadership
desde un
that
momento muy adverso,
is
hacer una tarea
working
de
in tremendously
construir
adverse
condiciones efectivas para que
circumstances
haya una
to
negociación que
devise
no
effective
vuelva a ser un
solutions
foul, que por eso
to
es que
have
está
a
desacreditada esa
negotiation that
palabra
might
en Venezuela.
actually work,
Entonces,
because
el
we
solo
don't
hecho
want
de
the
que
word
ya
to end up being
aquí,
meaningless
cuando
in
estoy hablando
Venezuela.
con ustedes,
So,
en cada
in
tarea que estamos
conversing with you
haciendo,
and
nosotros estamos
everything we
ejecutando
do,
una hoja de ruta.
we
Lo
are
que
pursuing
presentamos
a
el
roadmap,
25 de
which
febrero no fue
we
una
presented
declaración, fue
on
una hoja de
February
ruta.
25th. It
Cuando
wasn't a
hablamos de
declaration,
una
it's a
negociación
roadmap.
tomando como base
So
la
when we
verdad
talk
sin dar
about
ultimátum,
negotiations based in
entendiendo que en
truth
una
without
negociación tú tienes que
ultimatums,
escuchar la visión de la
because
otra
in a
parte,
negotiation you have
sin
to
duda.
listen to the other
Nosotros,
party's point of
cada
view, of
cosa que yo
course.
diga tiene que ir en la
Everything I
dirección y por eso
say
tengo que cuidar
has to
cada palabra
align, and that's
de
why I'm careful
apuntalar esa posibilidad,
with what I
no
say,
de
because I want
dinamitar
to support
esa
that
posibilidad,
possibility.
porque
I wouldn't want
eso
to do
puede
anything
ser
to
una gran
weaken
solución para
the
el pueblo
potential
venezolano.
for
Y
that, because it would be a
la
great
otra hoja
option
de
for the
ruta es la que te
Venezuelan people.
comenté,
The other
repavimentar el
roadmap,
camino electoral.
this is what I
Ahora,
referred to before as repaving the
es muy
road to the
difícil.
elections.
Hasta el momento,
It's very difficult.
el adversario ha
Thus
utilizado
far, the
las
adversary
negociaciones
has
de forma muy
used
coyuntural, de
negotiations
forma
in
muy
an
utilitaria
opportunistic,
y no para darle
utilitarian way,
respuesta a la
has not
necesidad
engaged in them in
del
order to
respeto a las
address
reglas de juego
the needs,
democráticas.
has not adhered
Hoy
to
estamos
the
en un contexto en donde
democratic
tienes
rules.
según
We're in a
nada más
context
ONGs muy serias en
in
materia
which
de
very
derechos humanos como
serious
Prodea, 25
NGOs,
presos
human
hoy.
rights
Tienes
NGOs have seen 28 people
1060 presos
taken prisoner. We have
en 121 mujeres, como lo dice Foro Penal.
1,600
En este contexto, en donde
prisoners right now. many women, and our adversary has not shown any true will to engage in negotiations in the true sense of the word. The first incentive would be to say, this is the path. The platform says to the Venezuelan people, the adversary, and the international community, the path is real, meaningful negotiations that respect the will of the people, that respect whoever ends up not coming out on top, that addresses all the real impacts, institutional, political, and otherwise. And there's a word that the Chavists don't use. In Spanish, it's convivencia. It's about getting along, it's coexistence. The roadmap has a key tool, the Mexico Memorandum. We have signed documents that are still in force. They didn't have an expiration date. And the political map shifted so that interlocutors would have to be reviewed. That's normal, that's understandable. But the task that I believe that the platform has, and every step it takes vis-a-vis negotiations, has to be clear. It has to be faithful to the mandate given to us by Venezuelans. But I know that Venezuelans understand that negotiations mean listening to the other party in order to arrive at a common agreement, and that means respecting the sovereign will of the people. And those are the signals we can send. That's the message we can convey. Now we don't know what happens in the mind of the person in charge of the country. I have not managed to comprehend what goes on in that mind, but I can honestly say that he's been irresponsible with regard to the Venezuelans, and it has caused great suffering. Roberto, I'd like to mention once more that those of us who are listening can ask Roberto questions through our askac.org app, askac.org. You select today's event and you can drop your questions there. Roberto, given the dynamic you've described, internationally, how do you see the role for the international community in seeking peaceful solutions for the country, particularly in a context, global context that's so tricky? We just mentioned the conflict in Ukraine. There are a lot of different authorities on the international scene now. What do you see as the role for international allies, given the new dynamics, and what might they do to help a move towards a democratic path? For Venezuelans, given the epic history we've had since Bolívar, and that's really a source of inspiration for us, we as Venezuelans would like to set the institutional rules. We don't want every electoral event to turn into an earthquake, and with everything that implies. So in that context, when you break with the Constitution, when you don't respect human rights, when you're always refusing to resolve problems, work with your adversary, in the Constitution being our common framework, negating the importance of the international community in terms of rising up out of this drastic situation. It would be naive to think that it couldn't be part of it. The role of the international community will always be of vital importance. I can assure you that I really doubt
como Venezuela con lo que
that a
representa
country like
no
Venezuela and
sea
all it
una prioridad
represents
para nuestros
would ever
hermanos del hemisferio
not
democrático.
be a priority for our
Roberto, ahora
fellow
nos ha llegado una
Democrats
pregunta
in
desde
the world.
Venezuela de
A
un
question for
Cristian
you
S, que
from
te pregunta
Christian S, who asks
¿cuál
you,
sería la labor de las juventudes
what
venezolanas
would be the work that Venezuelan
cambio?
young
Es
people could
decir,
do to bring
¿cómo ves
about
el rol de la
change?
nueva
How do you
generación
see the role of the
en Venezuela?
next generations in Venezuela?
Mira, no quiero hacer una frase cliché, ¿no?
I don't want to go into cliches here.
Yo creo que, y te puedo decir, lo que nos ha tocado a nosotros,
What we've
mi
been
generación,
through, my generation.
recibió, te lo voy a poner de esta manera. La generación que nos
Let me
precedió a
say it like
nosotros
this. The generation that came
recibió
before
de la
us
generación que los antecedió
came from the
país
generation
democrático,
before them, a
una sociedad,
democratic
un país
country,
con una gran movilidad
a
social,
country
un
with
país
great social
industrializado, una
mobility,
Venezuela
an
rural,
industrialized
Venezuela
country. We moved from a
urbana, una
rural
Venezuela
country to an
analfabeta,
urban
a una
country.
Venezuela
We went from being
educada,
an
de una gran clase
illiterate
media.
country
Yo te
to a
tengo que
literate
decir
country with
que
a
la Venezuela que nos
vast
tocó a nosotros
middle
recibir
class. So,
ha sido
however,
todo eso se fue perdiendo, ¿no?
the Venezuela we inherited
Como el
had
muchacho rico
lost
que
all
perdió
of
la
that.
fortuna que heredó.
It was like the
A
rich
nosotros nos ha
kid who
tocado
lost
vivir un país
his fortune.
en donde la constitución, la
We're a
democracia, los
country in
derechos
which
humanos.
constitution,
¿Y cuál es
democracy,
nuestro
and
reto? Este
human
mensaje que
rights
yo
were
le puedo
lost.
decir que me imagino que es muy
So,
joven. Nuestro reto
if
como
I were a
dirección
young
política,
person,
como
the
generación,
challenge
tanto quienes estamos en la
as
plataforma como
for
quienes no
those
están,
in the
pero también porque
platform
no
and
somos
for
el
those
ombligo
who
del
are
mundo,
not
quienes
that,
están
we're
comprometidos con la
not
causa
the
poderle devolver
center
a
of the
ellos el
universe
derecho de tener
either.
un país
We
profundamente
should give
democrático,
them the
moderno,
right to a
avanzado,
country that
y
is
en el que esa gran
democratic,
cantidad de jóvenes que
advance.
sintieron que no vale la
All
pena
these
estar
young
aquí,
people who
sientan que vale
think
la
it is
pena que
not
regresen
worthwhile to be here. We
y
want them to want to
y
come
que
back, to believe
devolverles
it
a
is
ellos
worthwhile to
la
be in
Venezuela
Venezuela. And
que
we want
una vez
to
fue y una Venezuela
give to them
mejor
the
a la que una vez
Venezuela
fue.
that at
Creo que nuestra
one
tarea
point existed and that has
precisamente
the
es
potential
esa.
to exist again.
Nosotros somos
I
una
think that's what
generación,
it
déjame
is.
decírtelo,
We are
de
a
transición, si se quiere,
generation,
para ayudar a
a transition
estos chamos
generation in a
viejos
matter of
de verdad
speaking.
sientan que su país vale la
We
pena.
want those coming
Y bueno, justo
after us to
lo acabas de
believe that
mencionar,
this is a
¿no?
worthwhile country to live
La
in.
diáspora venezolana
There
ha
is
logrado,
a
ha
major
aumentado a
Venezuelan
casi 8 millones
diaspora.
venezolanos
It's
en el
now
exterior en este
8
momento,
million
producto de
Venezuelans
la
living
crisis
abroad
en los últimos
as a
años.
result of
Aquí tenemos una
the
pregunta
crisis in recent years. So here we have a
Carlos,
question from
te pregunta si la
Carlos.
plataforma unitaria está
Carlos was saying
trabajando con el
is
gobierno de
the
Estados Unidos para ayudar a los
unitary
venezolanos de a
platform
pie
working with the
que
US
están
government to
atravesando
help
momentos difíciles
Venezuelans
en
who
el
are
país norteamericano.
experiencing difficulties
La
in
plataforma
the
unitaria ha
US?
fijado
The
una
unitary
posición muy clara,
platform has taken a
donde
very clear
primero
position.
defendemos el gentilicio venezolano.
We
Ser
defend
migrante no es un delito, ser
Venezuelans.
venezolano no es un
Being
delito.
a Venezuelan is not a crime.
Los simplismos no son sanos.
We don't believe
El
that
pueblo
you can
venezolano no se
simply
merece una
you can
etiqueta
simplify
de una banda
everything
o de
too much.
o de
Being
un
from
tren
Venezuela
delictivo.
doesn't mean that you're
Pero
part of a
te voy a decir una cosa,
gang or some sort of
también la
criminal
plataforma unitaria está
organization.
actuando con
The
sus equipos
the
porque creo
unitary
que lo que
platform
quieren
is
esos
working
compatriotas,
because
esos
what
migrantes,
we believe
es
those
una dirigencia
migrants,
política que se
our
ocupe
fellow
de ayudar,
country people,
no
is a
convertirlos
policy
en
that
botín
tries to
electoral,
help them.
no
We don't
convertirlos en
want
botín
them
político,
to
no estar
become
como pude
a,
ver uno
a symbol for a political fight
Nicolás
during the
Maduro diciendo
election
que va a mandar
campaigns.
cartas a Naciones
Maduro
Unidas
was saying that
cuando
he's
tú
going
ves
to send a
que nada más
letter
ni nada
to the
menos el 20
UN
de marzo
when
la oficina
on
del Alto
March
Comisionado de
20th,
Derechos
the
Humanos
Office of the UN
denuncian
High
todo lo
Commissioner
que
on
ha
Human
sido
Rights
la
was
falta de independencia del Poder Judicial,
decrying the
el uso
lack
de la
of
fuerza para el
independence of the
reprimir. Cuando
judiciary,
tú ves que el
the
18
use of
de
violence for
marzo,
repression,
admisión de determinación
and the
de hechos, denuncia
admission
la represión. Lo que quiero decir es
it
que la
was
doble moral
denouncing
no
repression. So,
funciona.
you
Y
know,
nosotros lo
this
que
is a
sí creemos es que
double
si queremos
standard
ayudar a
and it
nuestros
doesn't work.
compatriotas,
If we want to help our
respetando,
fellow
por supuesto, la
Venezuelans,
soberanía,
of
las
course,
instituciones, las leyes de
respecting
los
the
Estados Unidos,
sovereignty,
es
laws,
también a
institutions of the
sensibilizar
United
y
States,
trabajar
We need to raise awareness about the value that Venezuelan immigrants bring in terms of construction, the healthcare sector. I have found some cases, these are specific cases, where there are employers who have had Venezuelans working for them for decades now, where they're seeing these people with great anguish, great anxiety, doing the work that's necessary, that is engaging in dialogue, providing support. All of those who are political leaders, who are specialists in human rights, are coming together, working together to help support our fellow countrymen in the U.S. Venezuelan migration or migrants are healthy. They do not deserve unjust treatment. We all know that there have been different chapters in this emigration. I know someone whose daughter was kidnapped and then had to leave and because of policies that are so abusive, expropriations also of that. And migration is the response to the Maduro regime's misguided policies, abusive policies. And what we need to do, and we issued a communique on this, is we have to marshal all of our resources. It's not about how many retweets we get. It's not about how many hits we get. They want us to help. And our way of doing that is through our political work that's very specific, very measured. We want to raise awareness about this immigration that comes from a country that truly in its history was not a country of emigration, rather of immigration. And I sound called to the Venezuelan community in the US to unite and to not make this matter a partisan matter, to support their fellow Venezuelans. Venezuelan migrants do not need us to use them as a political football. And that is why, unlike what the regime is doing, we are working very seriously to provide support to our fellow Venezuelans. Very clear answer. Thank you, Roberto. I encourage those who are joining us today to read that communique. It's very bold, it's diplomatic, but it speaks seriously about the human rights of Venezuelan immigrants and refugees. It underscores the position of the platform vis-a-vis this dynamic. We have very little time left, but I can't wrap things up without asking you a couple other things in some of the proposals of the Maduro government in recent weeks. One is about a constitutional reform. Nobody's seen a draft of this reform. There are rumors going around that it might contain 80 different articles. What are your thoughts about the potential reform of the Constitution? What position has the Unitary Platform taken given this possibility? Would this be a way to mobilize the people? The platform, given all of the constraints of the current circumstances, we have been working with our regional and municipal directors. We are not going to stand still.
Una organización cívica, una
This is
organización
a
pacífica,
civic
democrática,
organization,
pero
a peaceful and
también firme,
democratic
¿no?
organization,
También
but we
muy claros de
also
que
are very
defender
determined and
la
have a firm
soberanía
stance. We will
del pueblo
defend
venezolano.
the
Mira,
sovereignty of the Venezuelan people.
todo lo que arranca mal termina mal. Nosotros no sabemos todavía de qué se trata esa
Everything
reforma,
Maduro does
pero un tema
ends up
como
bad.
todo lo que implique tocar nada más y nada menos que la Carta
Everything that
Fundamental, que ya está
entails
bastante
even
vulnerada, por cierto.
touching the
Aquí,
Constitution,
yo
which has
quisiera,
been, which
yo
is
creo
very
que la respuesta
vulnerable and has been
debería
violated
ser,
many times.
señor,
We
¿qué,
have to say is,
qué constitución va a reformar?
what
Comience por
constitution are you going to
respetarla.
reform? First,
El problema
you
de
have to
Venezuela
respect the
no es un descambio
Constitution.
constitucional,
The
el
problem
respeto a la
in
Constitución.
Venezuela
No,
isn't
es
about
allí donde
constitutional
está el
changes.
verdadero
It's
problema.
about
Y
respecting the
nada más y nada menos un
Constitution.
tema como una reforma constitucional que implica,
A
no
constitutional
es como otros
reform,
casos de deliberación democrática
unlike
política, en donde
previous
sí, un
cases
sector
where,
puede
yes,
propugnar una
one
ley,
sector
otro
may
puede
propose an
propugnar
amendment or a law
determinado planteamiento de naturaleza política,
or
¿no?
some
Esto
other
implica
type
un
of
gran
policy change. This
acuerdo
would
nacional.
it
¿Y de qué
require
acuerdo nacional tú puedes hablar con alguien que
national
está escondido en una
agreement. But
gaveta y en
what
una
kind of
comisión
agreement
secreta
can there
de
be
la
if
que
you've got
nadie habla?
something
Entonces
hidden
creo
in
que
a file
tengo
cabinet
certeza de que
and
esta
haven't been
reforma
open
va a dar
about it?
respuestas cuando eso sea una realidad. Por lo
When
pronto,
this
la
becomes a
demanda es
reality, we will
comienza por
have a
respetar la
response. But
Constitución.
our first demand would be respect for
Gracias,
the
Javier.
Constitution that exists.
Claro. Pues
Of course.
ante el muy poco tiempo que nos queda,
We have
quería ofrecer un
just a
espacio
few
para
minutes
dar
left,
un
so I'd
mensaje
like to
al
offer you
público
this
general,
opportunity
específicamente el público
to
de
share
Venezuela.
a message
¿Tienes
to the
algún
public in general,
mensaje
but
para el
particularly
venezolano o
the
la
public in
persona de a pie que
Venezuela?
está
The,
pensando en
the
qué hacer en
average
este momento,
Venezuelan who's
buscando razones
trying
para
to
ser
figure out
optimista?
what to do
¿Cuál
right
es,
now, looking
a
for
veces cuando
reasons to
hablamos de
be
Venezuela,
optimistic. Sometimes
pues siempre es
when we
muy
talk
fácil
about
ser pesimista,
Venezuela,
¿no? Pero
it's easy
¿tienes
to be
algún mensaje de
pessimistic.
esperanza
Do you have a
para los
message of
venezolanos que
hope
quieren algún tipo de apertura
for the
democrática,
Venezuelan
digamos?
people who
Yo
yearn
creo que
for
el mejor
democracy
mensaje de
and
esperanza que
democratic
podemos
opening
mandar
in the country?
nosotros en la
I think
plataforma
the
es
best message of
el
hope
testimonio que estamos dando,
is
que no vamos a traicionar al
witness
país,
we
porque
are
sabemos
bearing.
muy
We
bien el
will
mandato que
not
nos dio el
betray the
pueblo
country.
venezolano,
We
de
know
que vean
what
que a
we are
pesar
here
de la
to
situación
do.
tan
We want
difícil
them to see
en
that
la que estamos
despite the
atravesando,
difficult
compañeros como tú y
circumstances we're
Venezuela,
in,
exilados,
and
presos,
we have people who are in exile, people who
clandestinos,
have been
de todos los niveles,
incarcerated, people living
nacionales,
in
regionales,
hiding, but
municipales,
at a
comunitarios,
national, regional,
que
municipal,
seguimos
and community level,
manteniendo en pie de lucha.
we will continue
Sobre
forward with
todo,
our
creo que el
fight.
primer mensaje es que estamos resueltos a estar
And
unidos,
I think we
que
are
la plataforma no se
resolved
considera
to
el ombligo
remain
del mundo,
united. Again,
pero
we
sí
don't consider
consideramos
ourselves the
que
center
ese
of the
mandato que nos
universe,
dio
but
el
we
pueblo
know
venezolano el
that this
22 de octubre
mandate that we
del
got from the
28 de
Venezuelan
julio
people
nos
in
obliga a la
October and
reconstrucción
July
política. Esta hoja
28th
de ruta de la que
means
te
that
he
we
hablado
need to
es
move forward.
justamente
This
una
roadmap
conducción política, que sepan
is
que
the
estamos
way
trabajando,
we
que
will move
estamos
forward
unidos,
politically. They
que
need to
estamos en
know that
permanente
we are working,
comunicación,
we are united,
independientemente,
we
como te
will
lo
have
dije,
ongoing
autonomía
communication,
no significa no
regardless of the
trabajar
fact that
coordinadamente,
autonomy
no estar en
does not
comunicación
mean
con
not
María
working in
Corina, como la
coordination, or we are
principal
in
líder del
communication with
país,
Maria
todo lo que
Corina, who is the
significa
main leader
a
of the
nivel
country,
hemisférico,
and
por
everything that
supuesto
this
con el
means
mundo,
at a
pero también
hemispheric
déjame
level,
decirte que lo
at a
sepa el
global
país,
level.
que vamos a estar
I
en
want the
comunicación
country to know
con
that
otros
we are
sectores que aún
going to
teniendo
be
visiones diferentes,
engaged in communications with other
necesitamos que
sectors which may
articularnos,
have a different
comunicarnos
position
y,
in an
y, y
attempt
trabajar
to
unidos.
coordinate
Créeme
and work in
que
a unified
ese
fashion.
mandato, vuelvo y te
That
repito,
mandate,
a la dirigencia política del pueblo venezolano
and
nos
I
puede
say
perdonar muchas cosas,
the
pero no nos va a perdonar nuestra
political
unidad. Que la
leaders in
plataforma tiene
Venezuela
plena conciencia de la
have
unidad, que
been
vamos a estar
forgiven many
articulados
mistakes, but
permanentemente
what they will
con
not
otros
forgive us
sectores de
is
la
if we do
sociedad, del
not
mundo
work
productivo, de las
in a united
ONG,
way. We have to
de,
work with
de
NGOs,
los
the
grupos de las comunidades,
industry,
pero
productive
sí
sectors,
decirte muy
communities.
claramente que cada quien en su rol. El rol de la
Everyone
plataforma está
has a
listo.
role to
El
play.
rol de las
Our
ONG
role
es
is a
tanto las de
political
derechos
role.
humanos,
NGOs are
tanto
there
las
to
que
safeguard human
abogan por temas de
rights
salud,
or to
temas
address
eléctricos, de servicios
matters of
públicos, es
health, public services. That is a very important role. We have to always be in communication. The productive sector is there to create jobs. If a political group decides to try to pass itself off as an NGO, then we have problems. If others try to pass, if an NGO tries to pass themselves off as a political actor, then we have problems. We all have to play our role. We can't disguise what we're doing. And I think we need to speak very honestly to the people. We have to be very careful about our words. When I say that the platform is proposing negotiations to respect Venezuelans, but we're not giving ultimatums, even though we have not been respected, treated with respect, we know that this is a society that wishes to live in democracy and everybody needs to be treated with respect, always respecting the will of the majority. My message, therefore, is that I want you to know that we will not expressly allow unity to be destroyed. And we have this communique for the United States. We are working very seriously in this, and I continue to be convinced that the situation in Venezuela will be resolved and we will find the path to a true democracy. I'm not naive here. I do believe that what we're experiencing, we do not deserve as Venezuelan people. In every neighborhood, community, in the countryside, in urban areas, in the union movement, the political world, the moral reserves we have, which are cross-cutting, are those of the vast majority. And I think that's why we should be hopeful.
Muchísimas gracias, Roberto Enríquez, secretario
Well, thank
ejecutivo
you so
de la
much to
Plataforma
Roberto
Unitaria
Enríquez,
Democrática en
Executive Secretary
Venezuela.
of the
Quiero
Unitary
invitarle
Democratic
a
Platform
todos
of
los que nos están
Venezuela.
viendo
I
a seguir
invite
el trabajo
all
de
of
Roberto y de toda la
you and
Plataforma
our
Unitaria en
audience to
sus
continue
redes
to follow
y en sus
the work of the
comunicaciones y en sus
platform
movilizaciones,
in
y también a
their
seguir el trabajo de nosotros
platform,
en
social
el
media,
Atlantic
and to
Council y
follow our
especialmente el
work at the
trabajo de
Atlantic
nuestro
Council,
grupo de
specifically the
soluciones
work of our
para
Venezuela
Venezuela.
Solutions Group.
Muchísimas gracias de nuevo, Roberto.
Thank you very much to you
Sé
again,
que
Roberto.
estás muy ocupado,
I
así
know
que
that you're very
te
busy.
agradecemos la oportunidad de hablar
So we
contigo
really
y
appreciate the
poder
opportunity to
escucharte de
speak with
tu
you, to
reflexión.
be
Muchas
able to
gracias.
hear your views. Thank you so much. Oh, it was an honor, an absolute honor. I hope that this was helpful as an
Definitivamente que sí.
input for you
Muchas
all.
gracias a todos.
Absolutely, definitively. Thank you very much.